Welcome to the very first episode of Taiwan Tech Update, your weekly roundup of tech news stories from here in Taiwan, presented by me, Tomasz Koper, and Radio Taiwan International. I have a very interesting interview for you on Taiwan's tech investments in a city half a world away, where 1 in 6 residents is a student. Stick around to the second half of the show to find out which city and country I'm talking about. But first, we start with the roundup of Taiwan-related tech news for the week of April 18th to 24th. We start on the weekend with an interview by the Central News Agency with Rick Osterloh, Senior Vice President of Devices and Services at Google. In it, he said Taiwan is playing a central role in Google's transition towards AI-based computing, being the home of key Google partners like the local tech giants MediaTek and TSMC. He also praised the Taiwan Research and Development Team, which, in the hardware department, is Google's largest outside the United States for its amazing capabilities. He said they were crucial for Google's global innovation strategy and to its shift into the AI computing landscape. This will prove very important in the coming months and years as Google develops its Gemini AI ecosystem and brings it to what Osterloh calls the first generation of AI-native devices. Thankfully, he does show some caution about fully AI-native devices, saying they will require rethinking user interfaces and underlying technologies. That's a very welcome statement, especially for those of us who remember some of the disastrous early attempts at creating such devices, like the Rabbit R1. Also, over the weekend, we found out that the Taiwanese semiconductor security solutions provider JMM announced the opening of its Czech office on Friday in the country's second-largest city, Brno. The company hopes to work with the Czech National Semiconductor Cluster to lay the foundations for cooperation in semiconductor security testing and security standardization across borders. The company, which specializes in quantum-resilient cybersecurity and hardware security solutions, wants to establish its European R&D hub in Brno. This isn't really coming out of the left field, since Czechia and Taiwan have been working together in tech areas for years at this point. They have the Joint Advanced Chip Design Research Center, and JMM new office will surely not be the last a Taiwanese tech company opens in the country. For more on Taiwan-Czech tech relations, stick around to this week's featured interview with Marcin Jerzewski, the head of the Taiwan office of the think tank European Values Center. I kind of gave away the surprise from the top of the show there, but you should listen to the interview regardless. On Monday, the Taiwan Space Agency said it will host the third edition of the Taiwan International Assembly of Space Science, Technology and Industry, or TASTI, from November 8th to 11th this year in Taiwan's southern Tainan City. They expect over 3,500 professionals from 18 countries to attend the event. On the sidelines, we will also see the 15th Nano-Satellite Symposium and the 9th Asia-Oceania Space Weather Alliance Workshop, as well as an expo component featuring more than 75 Taiwanese and international companies split into 5 themed zones like supply chains, satellite applications, and testing, so plenty of things to do and see for space aficionados. A highlight of the discussions, per reporting by the Central News Agency, will be using 32 key technology gaps identified by NASA that have to be addressed before humans can live on the moon long term as a benchmark to evaluate Taiwan's industry and academia. Looking forward to insights from that. On Tuesday, Taiwan's External Trade Development Council, or TAITRA for short, announced in a move surprising absolutely no one that NVIDIA founder and CEO Jensen Huang will deliver a keynote speech on June 1st, a day before the start of one of Taiwan's biggest tech exhibitions, Computex. He's expected to outline the latest developments in artificial intelligence and talk about the partnerships needed to build a broader AI ecosystem. This year's event will span multiple locations and feature 1,500 companies occupying 6,000 booths. Expect on-the-ground coverage of the event from yours truly in early June. Big tech news day on Wednesday when TSMC unveiled its cutting-edge A13 process during the North America Technology Symposium it organized in California. The new node represents an evolution of its previous A14 process. Compared to its predecessor, it's 6% smaller but will maintain full compatibility, allowing users to quickly upgrade their hardware. But innovation didn't stop at A13 because TSMC also previewed their next generation A12 node. Now, this one does feature some architecture changes in the form of superpower rail technology, which will provide backside power for AI and high-performance computing applications. TSMC says A13 will enter mass production in 2029, which is also when we're going to see the first A12 chips. Unsurprisingly, TSMC stock soared to unexpected heights following the news, pulling the Taiwanese stock market with them. Estimates vary, but you should know that this one company accounts for an astonishing chunk of Taiwan's equity market. Some say even more than half. That's a lot of eggs in one basket and a possible cause for concern if the AI boom ever starts floundering. More on that in a bit. Also on Wednesday, Taiwan's Economy Ministry approved 2 applications from Google to invest an additional 27 billion NT dollars, or over 850 million US dollars, in data processing and semiconductor-related business in Taiwan. The investment will be channeled through Google's 2 wholly owned Singapore subsidiaries. But what are they investing in exactly? Well, local media in Taiwan say that the money will be partially used to pay off debt from expanding cloud business and setting up data centers in central Taiwan. But they note that Google is still planning another data center in Tainan. Taiwan does have rather strict capital flow controls, but it seems regulators found it in their hearts to welcome the better part of $1 billion coming into the country. I don't know, maybe they liked the interview with Rick Osterloh from a few days earlier. On Thursday, the government-funded Research Institute for Democracy, Society, and Emerging Technologies, or DCED, held an event presenting a research report on Taiwan's drone exports. In it, DCED said that exports of completed drones to Europe rose more than 40-fold in 1 year, from around 2,500 units in 2024 to 100,000 in 2025. Europe is now Taiwan's biggest drone market, with most shipments going to Poland and Czechia, from where, according to DCED non-resident fellow Lin Ting Wei, they are likely transferred to Ukraine. But this doesn't change the fact that China is still the main source of drone imports for both of the Central European countries. In its report, DCED made a major policy recommendation: closer institutional cooperation with Europe to replace the current fragmented model, which is difficult to scale. On Friday, the Central News Agency reported that the research organization Omdia has significantly raised its semiconductor revenue forecast for 2026, which now estimates a growth rate of a whopping 62.7%. This is propped up mainly by the demand for memory, both DRAM and NAND flash. Other factors, though, include strong demand for data center and AI computing infrastructure. Two more stories caught my attention on Friday, neither directly related to Taiwan, although both likely to affect some employees here, and both being symptomatic of the recent developments in the global tech sector. Meta announced that it will be cutting 8,000 jobs, or around 1/10 of its workforce, in an effort to shed costs in the race to develop ever more advanced artificial intelligence. Almost at the same time, Microsoft announced its efforts to streamline its workforce through voluntary retirement programs, which is a first for the tech giant's 5-decade-long history. Both companies have been investing billions in AI research and development, and, well, they don't really have a whole lot to show for it. According to Reuters, the adoption rate of Microsoft's flagship AI product, Microsoft 365 Copilot, is stunningly low, only around 3% of the total 450 million strong user base. So, opinion time. There is a lot of money riding on artificial intelligence, but the financial returns on all those investments have been rather meager to date. The public opinion on AI tools also seems to be souring of late, although in some areas, like translation, the numbers do look somewhat better. So far, it's the hardware makers like Taiwan's TSMC that seem to be reaping the benefits of this new technology, as old juggernauts and newer investors bleed themselves dry of cash to buy expensive hardware. But even the manufacturers will be exposed to losses if the AI boom loses momentum, as well as entire economies that increasingly rely on them, just like here in Taiwan. A rising tide lifts all boats, as they say, but a big splash might soon test how waterproof they are. And before we get to this week's featured interview, here's a fun fact. Did you know that the NASA astronaut Kjell Lindgren is part Taiwanese? He was born in 1973 to a Taiwanese mother and an American father, lived in Taichung for the first 2 years of his life before moving to the United Kingdom and later to the United States. He visited Taiwan this week, and if you're curious about him, his life, and what he had to say about Taiwan's role in the Artemis program and humanity's stewardship of the Earth, check out our coverage of his visit on the RTI website and our YouTube channel. Now, this week, I had the pleasure of talking to Marcin Jerzewski, the head of the Taipei office of the Czech-based think tank European Values Center. And here's how that conversation went. Marcin, thank you for giving me your time. I want to talk about the Taiwan and Czechia and more broadly the region and the tech cooperation that we have been seeing lately. So let's start with the basics. Why are we seeing this increase in tech cooperation between Taiwan and Czechia and maybe other countries in the Central and Eastern European region?
We should remember that Taiwan and Czechia have embarked on industrial cooperation very early on as they sought to develop informal, albeit practical ties. Foxconn, one of Taiwanese tech giants, became one of the most prominent foreign investors in the Czech Republic, bringing not only capital but also quality workplaces to the Central European Republic. And this cooperation has been the foundation for the most recent opening in not only economic, industrial, but also political ties between Taiwan and the Czech Republic that we have witnessed since approximately 2021. Additionally, Taiwan and the Czech Republic have a shared interest in developing industrial cooperation, which is centered around the idea of a non-red supply chain, meaning that both countries understand that by relying too heavily on components manufactured in countries that may be considered their authoritarian adversaries, and that includes the People's Republic of China, their economic security might be compromised. Therefore, in strategic technologies such as semiconductors, it is mutually beneficial for them to work together as they embark on a strategy of diversification as the primary tool of risk mitigation. It ought to be borne in mind that for the Czech Republic, the semiconductor industry is of great importance, given that Czechia has traditionally considered the automotive industry to be the cornerstone of its economy. Without advanced semiconductors, Czech automotive manufacturers would have a much harder time remaining competitive. And that's exactly where we see synergies between industrial policies of both countries, but also political rationale behind these.
Well, automotive chips are also very important in what other Taiwanese companies like TSMC are doing in the region, setting up a fab in Dresden. Are these political and geopolitical concerns, creating non-red supply chains, the main driver of these investments, or is it really just the economic interest of being able to provide chips for the automotive sector in Czechia and in Germany, really the key to why we are seeing these very big investments?
I truly believe that this is not a zero-sum game. Political considerations are very strongly intertwined with the commercial economic interests that you have considered. Indeed, European automotive manufacturers are struggling to remain competitive on the global market, particularly as China is becoming increasingly skilled in manufacturing highly efficient but also affordable electric vehicles. Therefore, cooperation with Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturers is seen as highly complementary. Nevertheless, it is very difficult to detangle these considerations from the political ones, given that we are now seeing that at the EU level, for example, the strengthening of the European semiconductor ecosystem is considered to be one of the key priorities, one of the key tools to achieving what European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen calls strategic autonomy. Therefore, investments of Taiwanese giants such as TSMC in Dresden, but also the emerging ecosystem of semiconductor R&D, packaging and testing facilities, etc., that is emerging in other parts of Central Europe, including the Czech Republic, is also critically important. And then the political consideration for Taiwan is that commercial interests of these key companies that are significant contributors to the economy are best protected if they are highly diversified. Of course, there's also more of a cynical, one could argue, political motivation behind these big ticket semiconductor investments that we have seen flowing out of Taiwan in recent years to Dresden, Germany, but also to Kumamoto, Japan. We can see that these destinations are not coincidental. TSMC is investing very heavily in these two locations, and it is doing so as well in Arizona in the United States. There is an expectation from countries that Taiwan has traditionally seen as providers of its security, so Japan, the United States, but increasingly also Europe when it comes to the economic dimension of its security policy, to have Taiwan pay back the favor through these investments. So it is a very different model of economic engagement from, for example, very classical checkbook diplomacy that Taiwan was pursuing in Europe until at least the early 2000s. The case of its relations with North Macedonia serves as an illustrative example here. But this is all to say that I find it impossible to fully dehyphenate these commercial and political considerations.
Focusing on the practical considerations for companies who are investing in Czechia and the region, how are local governments in Czechia and Germany and Poland, for that matter as well, how are they trying to attract Taiwanese tech investors? Why, should a company choose Brno, for example, to set up their R&D center, like in the case of JMM Tech, rather than any other city in the Czech Republic?
And indeed, this is the question of government support for these investments is an important one, but it is also very complicated. Many of our listeners might understand that Europe is currently in times of political upheaval where populist forces many of whom demonstrate strong linkages to authoritarian countries such as the People's Republic of China or Russian Federation, are pushing against cooperation with Taiwan. Additionally, many local governments that have the responsibility of curating the industrial policy in municipalities that would make sense as an investment destination for Taiwan, for example, because of sheer geography, might not have enough competence, might not have enough capacity to handle international affairs. That's why it's a very complicated landscape. It is no secret that Dresden, Germany, was selected as the site of a new and first ever TSMC semiconductor plant in Europe because of generous subsidies that the company received from both the federal government of Germany, but also from the state government of Saxony. It ought to be borne in mind that Saxony is actually the only one out of 16 federal states of Germany that maintains a permanent representative office in Taipei, which greatly facilitates people-to-people exchanges between Saxony and Taiwan in domains related to education, B2B matching, and G2G exchanges as appropriate and at an appropriate level within the constraints of Germany's One China policy. The Czech government has been very proactive in engaging Taiwan between 2021 and 2025, when Prague was governed by a coalition of centrist and center-right parties under the name SPOLU, meaning together. That coalition emphasized the importance of normative underpinnings in industrial policy. In other words, it was very important for the SPOLU coalition that Czechia would pursue actions such as the establishment of a non-red supply chain or diversifying its economic relations away from the People's Republic of China. And as much as Czechia has earned its moniker of being one of Taiwan's best friends in Europe due to the actions pursued by Prague, the take-up of opportunities related to cooperation with Taiwan at local level has been somewhat more sluggish. You mentioned Brno as a location for some of the most advanced and actually tangible projects seeking to bring Taiwan and Czechia together when it comes to semiconductor industrial cooperation. This is no coincidence. Brno is the second largest city in the Czech Republic that has a very strong record of results-oriented international engagements. It is an academic city. It houses the Masaryk University, which has a long-standing legacy of cooperating with Taiwanese institutions of higher learning. Also, the Czech Defense University is there cooperating with the Taiwanese National Defense University. So as an academic hub, as one of the largest urban centers in the Czech Republic, it simply makes sense. On the front of subnational engagements, here I would like to highlight that Poland has truly been a leader in the European context of pursuing active engagements with Taiwan at subnational level. One of the most recent agreements between focusing on city-to-city partnerships has been sealed between the city of Gliwice in the Silesian region of Poland and Hsinchu, the heart of Taiwan's semiconductor industry. Gliwice is currently undergoing an industrial transformation as Poland is moving away from the mining industry and focus on production of fossil fuels as one of the drivers of its economy. And therefore, municipal cooperation between these municipalities simply makes sense.
Thank you very much for this very enlightening conversation. Marcin Jerzewski from the European Values Center. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
That's all I have for you in this week's edition of Taiwan Tech Update. Thank you for staying with me throughout this inaugural episode. And if you have ideas or opinions on the show, its format, topics, or just technology in general, you can email them to me at Tomasz, that's TOMASZ, at rti.org.tw. Once again, that's TOMASZ at rti.org.tw. Please include Taiwan Tech Update or TTU in the subject line. I'm your host, Tomasz Koper, and I'll be back with another update next week.